Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Elena Kaus. I'm an associate professor of English here at GSW. Thank you all for coming out tonight to this creative writing panel. Thanks especially to our panelists for spending this evening with us and sharing your perspectives and experiences. I'd also like to thank the Department of English and Modern Languages for funding the food. Thanks to Penny Dearman, Jennifer Ryer, and Josie Russell for bringing desserts. And thanks to Tex and Org for recording. With that said, we have 3 speakers, as you know, this evening. They each will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes on topics relevant to creative writing and to creative writers. After the presentations, there will be plenty of time for discussion and Q&A, so I hope you have questions. We'll save those for the end. All right, so I'll go ahead and introduce our first panelist, Robert Hughey. Robert graduated with his BA in English from GSW in 2021. Since graduating, he has attended Southern New Hampshire University, where he earned a graduate certificate in professional writing and has 2 classes left to earn the Master of Fine Arts, the MFA in creative writing. He is writing an urban fantasy novel set in contemporary Atlanta for his MFA thesis, and is also writing a book of poetry and short stories dedicated to the divine feminine goddess just for fun. Robert is currently a part-time English instructor at both GSW and South Georgia Technical College. Robert.
Thank you very much. So my subject tonight is storytelling as a vital human activity. And I thought if I was going to talk to you about storytelling, perhaps it's a good opportunity to tell you a story. And I picked 3 brief stories to tell you to illustrate the function of storytelling and how we see story as people, as humans. My first story is set in the middle of the 20th century in Poland, in Warsaw, which is the capital. And this is a time when the Germans have occupied Poland, and of course they crusaded against the Jewish people. And they moved the Jewish people to ghettos, or they were early concentration areas where people were isolated. They could not leave, they could not go to work, they had to live there full time, they had to do what the Germans told them to do, and that's where they were situated. And this is where we meet Helen. Helen was a young woman in her early 20s, and she and a group of women were all seamstresses. They would do uniforms and such for the Germans. She saw some of the younger women, maybe 12 to 18, and saw that they didn't necessarily have the skills of other seamstresses, and she thought, well, they should be in school, they should be getting their education. So while she convinced the Germans to let her have a classroom to teach half the day of the students where they'd learn reading and arithmetic and functional education, but one of the things about living in the ghetto is that there were certain rules that seem obscene in the 21st century perspective. One of them was that you couldn't have a book. They felt books gave you hope. Books gave you a way out. So they outlawed them. You could not have a book, and actually under penalty of death, they killed people for owning books. And Helen, well, she was a bit of a rebel. So she happened to have a copy of Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. And she had a 7-hour window where she was allowed to sleep during the day, and she would spend 2 to 2.5 hours at the beginning of each night reading a chapter or 2 of this book. And then whenever she would meet with her class, she would teach them writing, she would teach them arithmetic, but she'd also recount the story of Gone with the Wind, chapter by chapter, which is, those of you who have read it, it's a big book. And she went chapter by chapter. And when asked why she did this under penalty of death, under the threat that this would be, she said, because for an hour every day, these girls weren't in the ghetto. They were in the American South. They were having adventures. They got away. So this is our first function of storytelling. It shows us another reality. Stories are something people are willing to risk their lives for. Interestingly enough, Helen is the cousin of Neil Gaiman, who is author of American Gods, Coraline, and many other very wildly successful novels. And then supplementally, she did revisit, there were 4 survivors of her class after the war, and she revisited one of them, and they were said to call each other by character names from the Gone with the Wind book. Next, I'll tell you the story of Fred. This is the stories teach us empathy for the lives of others totally different from us. It allows us to live and exist in the mind of people of different ethnicities, religions, genders, sexual orientations, and in the case of speculative fiction, even different species. I've taught American literature, and one of the pieces of literature I like to teach is the slave narrative of Frederick Douglass, our character Fred. This is a first-hand account of the realities of slavery in the Deep South before the Civil War. Sometimes my students have mistaken impressions about what slavery was like. They think, oh, it wasn't so bad, or people were kind to the slaves, or they have kind of a happier, less guilt-ridden and less painful idea of what slavery was. But by reading the truth of slave narratives, of stories like Frederick Douglass, we see that it's full of trauma, humiliation, abuse. The things that Frederick Douglass went through are obscene. Once again, we return to that word today. Frederick Douglass is significant in that he had the idea that he was going to learn to read. He had one afternoon off a week or every 2 weeks, and he would spend the time with dock workers, having them teach him letters, teach him how to read. He was determined to, even though, again, under penalty of death, he was told he would not be allowed to read. He would not be allowed to have books. He would not be allowed to have literature. He wanted to experience the world beyond his situation, even under the penalty of death. Again, stories and even the ability to read are willing to die for, are reasons people are willing to die for. Stories also foster positive mental health, empathic but also memory retention, to experience positive emotions, to help us engage with others and problem solve. My last story tonight is of the Dogon people. They're people in Africa, hello sir. And they have oral histories that span thousands of years, generations. And all of our ancestors used oral histories and oral stories to communicate our history together. They taught lessons. The Dogon people have an interesting story that they recount from thousands of years ago. And that is meeting a people called the Noma, Nommao, Nomo. The Nomo people were said to be star people, people from the Sirius system who were aquatic in nature. They descended from the stars into the ocean and then walked onto the land. And the Dogon people have rituals and magic that talks of the communication between these people, that they taught agriculture, they taught medicine, they taught astronomy. And of course, when modern scholars would meet the Dogon people, they would tend to not believe that, oh, you actually met extraterrestrials in your past. But interestingly enough, the Dogon people knew most of the planets in the solar system. They knew that Sirius is actually a multi-star system, that there's Sirius A and Sirius B, and I believe now we know there's also Sirius C. The Dogon knew of Sirius A and Sirius B, which is not necessarily evidence that yes, they met extraterrestrial people, but it does show you the power of storytelling in that it makes you question reality a little bit more. And that's what I wanted to close with tonight, is that stories teach us the ways of those who have come before us and give us a new way of looking at our lives and reality, and perhaps prepare us for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll save questions for the end. Our second panelist is Michaela Reed. Michaela is a third-year MFA fiction student attending Georgia College and State University. Born and raised in Albany, Georgia, her love for the South often shows up in her writing, where she explores topics such as race, family, and identity in a Southern setting. Largely influenced by Southern Gothic writing, Michaela strives to create vulnerable characters and journey with them as they confront the mysteries and histories, the connections and disconnections that attempt to strengthen them while also threatening to break them. Michaela also likes practicing languages, drawing, crocheting, and playing video games. And her first publication is due to appear in the spring 2025 issue of Cottonwood Literary Magazine. Michaela.
Thank you. I'd want to talk a little bit about the ins and outs of getting into an MFA program, a little bit about being in an MFA program. So maybe mine sounds a little bit more logistical, but here are just some tips and information that I would have liked to know, for instance, when I was applying for programs. So I'm going to be reading a lot. Forgive me. It's story day. So, like I said, I'm going to share some tips and information kind of based on my own journey, but I've molded it so that people can use it as an outline. And I want to begin by addressing writing experience. This was something that bothered me, made me anxious when I was first applying for graduate school. I was afraid that my lack of creative writing experience, my lack of publications, was going to diminish the value of my application. I was afraid I was going to get stamped out by other graduate applicants who perhaps had works already published or had other classes under their belt. And as you can see, I'm sitting here right now, so that wasn't the case at all. It's not the case for many people. One of my professors actually stated to us this year that the reason why we're where we are is because of our potential. It's because of the skills that we already have that need refining. It's not because our writing is perfect. I'm sure that many writers know that the perfect story is hard to come by and probably doesn't exist. So let's just go ahead and get the jitters of experience out of the way. If you're willing to put in the work and you're passionate about a story that you have, you're able to get into an MFA program, you're able to sculpt those skills. So let's find out where you want to be. Like any education, graduate school is a commitment. It is an endeavor, like I said, meant to sculpt existing creative skills. There are a lot of factors to consider, so let's make a list. First, let's talk about location. Budding and established writers learn and study in classrooms all over the country and the world. Writing is often regional, so consider where you want to be and what that environment will offer for you in your writing. I know that I like to write with a Southern Gothic flavor, so I wanted to stay in the South. And my body runs on sweet tea, so I can't cross the sweet tea line. I can't. I went to Kansas and it was not fun. When applying for graduate school, my mentors actually stressed the importance of residency. So residency is going to tie into location. It's going to determine how often you will interact closely with peers, with professors. Some programs have the option for a low residency. Some programs are completely online. The program that I'm in right now is completely in person, so it's full residency. I have to be in all of my classes. They're actually having class right now, but I have an excuse to not be there. It was a good excuse. They're proud of me. I also want to say look at the school's entire English department faculty, not just the MFA faculty. You know, if there's a genre or an author, if there's a work that you're interested in learning about and that school offers it, just open yourself to that option. Flannery O'Connor, I kind of have to mention her. I go to Georgia College and State University. It's her alma mater. I knew nothing about her when I first went to the school, but I was interested in learning about her Southern Gothic kind of style of writing, and now one of my most knowledgeable and encouraging mentors was my professor from that class, and he is not in the creative writing department. So it's worth it to expand yourself beyond that. Don't think that your MFA program is a limit. It's just a gateway to whatever you want to do and wherever you want to go. Speaking of a gateway, there's also your genre. You have to see which programs will offer the genre that you want. My program only offers 3. It's fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction. I'm in the fiction program. And in an MFA program, that genre becomes a significant part of your identity as a writer. But as something that I've struggled with too, just let me say that that identity is completely under your control. You know, you may enter the program thinking, I'm a writer, I want to be a fiction writer. And then maybe you take a poetry class and you say, oh, I'm a fiction writer, but I also write a few poems too. You know, you're kind of always changing and getting to that perspective of, I am a writer, you know, I just write this. You know, maybe you want to write a book of short stories and poems, just for fun. But I just want to emphasize that finding that identity, finding things is what a good MFA program is going to do for you. So look for those people, look for that location that's going to take you out of your comfort zone and expand your boundaries into finding something. Next is program length. Sometimes we don't think that is a big factor to consider, but it is. Some programs are only 2 years, some are 3, mine is 3 years. So I'm in my 3rd year now. That means that I'll be submitting my thesis in spring, but you have to think about your timeline. When are they expecting to get that big project from you? Set aside some time to panic, recollect a little bit. We all do it, but don't be discouraged if you have to rework some things along the way. Just see what options a program will offer you. There is a student in my cohort who isn't graduating in the professional 3 years that the program gives him, but it was an option. So always check your options. Next is very important, pay attention to the funding options. Schools with fully funded MFA programs offer assistantships that provide tuition remission and stipends. So that's going to be another obligation under your belt as a student. You may be required to teach English classes. You may be required to work as an editor for the program's literary journal. I am actually in my university's grants office. I was very fortunate to get that spot. I'm thankful for all of the classes I could put on my resume. It was the last spot they had for me, but because of that, I'm in the program. And it's an extra responsibility outside of the program, but it's also very good for professional development. So make full use of those assistantships too. And speaking of other responsibilities, I just mentioned, you may be an editor or a reader for a literary journal. My program does have a literary journal. It's called Arts and Letters. We have to read, beginning in our first year, we have about 7 to 10 submissions that we have to read a week. It's a good thing because it keeps you reading in your genre. It keeps you constantly learning what people are writing now, and it helps you figure out what you want in your own writing, what you don't want in your own writing. And it's also really good on your resume after a few years to be able to say, I was the assistant fiction editor for the Arts and Letters Journal, especially if you want to go into publishing or working with magazines. Like I said, also teaching English classes. I'm not required to teach, so I can't go into all of the ins and outs of what it's like to be a graduate assistant who is teaching. I was able to get another option and teach 7th grade students creative writing at the Georgia College Early College. So if for whatever reason you're not able to teach for your assistantship, or if you don't have that option and you want to go into that field, ask questions, see what kind of classes you can take. It was actually a really great time. By the end, I was teaching students who were published in their own journal. So it was great. And also, just reach out to current MFA students, like me or like someone else talk to directors and program managers and see if they can connect you to a person. Faculty have really great things to say, but the people who are going to know the ins and outs and are going to be able to tell you what life is like for an MFA student are those current students right now. And we get a lot of emails towards the end of the semester asking if we're willing to speak to prospective students. And so I've had many Zoom calls. Sometimes it's just a quick email sent with some information, but don't be afraid to ask if you can actually speak to someone. And now that we've kind of made that list, I want to dive a little bit deeper into what my life is like so far as an MFA student. Every program is different, but I just want to give you all a look at the curriculum. Like I said, some of the other obligations that we've talked about before. As a quick rundown, my curriculum consists of workshops and seminars in my genre, which is fiction, MFA and non-MFA elective courses, and then also thesis classes. So, like I said, it's designed to be completed in 3 years. The first year is kind of setting you up as this is your genre, here's an introduction, let's get your non-MFA electives out of the way so that you can kind of dive deeper into the rest of the program. Like I said, I took a Flannery O'Connor class. I learned about E.L. Doctorow and Philip Roth. I did not know who they were, but thanks to the program, now I do. They have some great books out there. The second year for me is kind of a time of waxing and waning. You know, you're taking some non-genre MFA courses, you're figuring out your thesis, you're exploring a bit, you know, get your hands into things. If a university has research day, my program doesn't even require it to be a research paper. It invites creative writing students to read their own work there. And there are lots of other opportunities that programs can have. Just constantly put yourself out there. Take another class. I took a French language and culture class just for fun. I have a classmate who's taking a pottery class, I believe. So it's extra work, but it's time to explore. The third year is a time to wrap things up. That's when the panic kind of begins, you know, the big deadline's coming, but it's also just an opportunity for you to get to that grand finale, really start to, I would say, pinpoint where you want to go. So don't panic too much, but it is the end of it. And I just want to say that just stay focused, you know, stay focused on what you want, even if what you want changes, because there's going to be a lot of changes in the MFA program. You have guidelines. My guideline for my thesis is 100 pages of a collection of short stories or a novel, and I have changed what that is going to be so much, but my advisor is very patient. So just be flexible. Find a program that is flexible for you and then be flexible in that program. And that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, our third panelist is Sara Sellers. Sara majored in English at GSW and graduated in 2018. During her time here, she won the Dolores Randolph Capitan Award for Excellence in Creative Writing. She also worked at the Writing Center and on the staff of the Sirocco Literary Magazine and Southwestern newspaper. Since graduating, she's published 3 adult fantasy romance novels, including The Stygian Crown and The Storm King. She's currently working full-time as an author and lives in Americus with her partner and 2 mini cats.
Okay, I just wanted to, I guess, focus on some of the how I ended up writing for a living, because that's kind of weird, and go into a bit about the 2 big like publishing paths of traditional versus self-publishing or indie publishing. So, you know, I was an English major, and I'm sure y'all get it. Any English majors here get it all the time. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to teach? And it's like, I don't think so, no. And so at first I was like, maybe I should be a librarian. And then I figured out you have to get your master's for that. And then some of my peers when I was a major were working part-time at the library, and I didn't realize how much of that job was keeping people from watching porn on public computers. So the next one was like, maybe, because I always wanted something, you know, revolving around books, because that's something that's always brought me joy. And next I was like, well, maybe I'll be an editor for books in, you know, but then the big 5 publishers, you know, your Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Simon & Schuster, those are all really based out of New York. And to become an editor for one of those, it's a lot of times an unpaid internship. That might have changed, you know, since I was looking into it, but unpaid internships and then not really New York salaries once you actually get there. So, and nowadays freelance editing, like online, has become much more popular, and especially with the rise of indie publishing. But then I was like, oh, what are my other options? So one day I'm reading a book, and it's a popular book. I couldn't tell you the title of it now, even if you asked me to. but it was bad. And it was, and the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking of, what I would change to fix this and all. And then after that, the mistake I'm sure a lot of eventual writers have made, or they're like, I can write something better than this, and if this makes money, then maybe I can make money at it too. So 5 years later, I actually finished a thing, and I wrote most of it during college. I wasn't disciplined about it. It was more of a hobby at that point, really. But and I did consider pursuing an MFA. I remember, I think I was a freshman, and the professor who told me this doesn't work here anymore, but I think I asked her, she was my advisor, and asked her about grad school. She's like, I wouldn't recommend. I think in that, it was the context of like going into being a professor or something. I don't remember exactly, but I was, at that point, I had a book and barely made it out of college, so with the bachelor's. So I started to research, how do you go from getting this thing that's on a document on your computer into the hands of people that aren't just, your mom. And so I listened to a bunch of podcasts, research a lot, and you'll often hear anecdotes from successful writers, and because the interviewer will usually ask, how'd you get your big break or make it where you are now? And the common themes among those are luck or knowing the right person, which isn't the most reproducible thing. But one of your big choices to make at that point is if you're going to pursue traditional publishing or self-publishing. And traditional, like I said, your Penguin Random House, your Big Five. There are smaller, like small press publishers too, but with those, you often need a literary agent for an editor to even read, your stuff. Like they don't just accept blind submissions. They only field stuff that comes from a literary agent. And a literary agent is a lot like an actor's agent you might be familiar with in Hollywood. And there, you send out query letters, which are really just kind of a short synopsis of your book to these agents, and then they're really acting as a gatekeeper. There's lots of levels of gatekeeping with traditional publishing, and that's a slow, arduous process of trying to get someone to pay attention to you. And part of the reason why is they're working for free, really, until they sell your book. That's the only time they make money, at which point the industry standard commission is 15% of like your advance and your royalties and all, once they sold your book to a publisher. But just some of the, like a brief list of the pros and cons of each. With traditional, you're gonna have an advance, like it might not be a lot of money, but they're gonna pay you something up front. Whereas with indie, you're not gonna make money until someone's buying it. Bookstore placement, these publishers, they have contracts with your Books A Million, your Barnes and Noble, that gets that shelf space. It's a lot harder to, as a self-published author, to get your book like in a traditional brick and mortar store. You can still sell print copies and all, but usually it's more of a print on demand, getting shipped out as the orders come in situation. With traditional, you have the benefit of their marketing and creative teams. So they're gonna design your cover for you. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. You might hate the cover. They'll let you give some input on it, but ultimately the marketing team's gonna make the choice of what they think will sell that book the best. At the end of the day, it's a business for them. And that extends to things like certain creative freedoms, like how long your book is going to be. And some of my friends in the community I've made, they would get a literary agent and they might have an adult book and they'll shop it around and think, oh, well, maybe it's better if we rewrite this so to sell it to a young adult audience. And at that point, you know, you could say no, but that might be the end of that relationship. So the gatekeeping, like I said, not just really one but two gates, because first you got to get into a literary agent, and then a literary agent has to convince an editor to, and then there's even more, because then, you know, your editor at Penguin Random House has to convince their boss and the marketing team that this is worth them spending money on. So there's a lot of that, and that slows down the process as a whole. It speeds another factor, because, you know, if a book comes out tomorrow, that book's usually been with the publisher at that point for a year, and then, you know, the author has possibly, if they're new, probably been done with it for even a year before that. So you've got a slow turnaround time if you're trying to react to like market trends, or maybe you're just prolific and you're writing, you know, books left and right. That's the scenario where being self-published might be more beneficial for you. Let's see. And you're still going to have to market yourself, even if you're traditional. Your marketing team's only going to do so much for you. And then, well, the big one is money. You know, you have the advance, but a lot of people don't know. Say Penguin Random House, you know, pay me $5,000 in advance. Before that book ever starts making royalties, I have to earn out that $5,000. So it's possible some books never earn out their advance, you know, so they never start to make royalties on that. But they're, you know, taking that risk on investing in your book. And part of that is that your royalty rates with traditional are typically much lower, especially ebooks. For example, Amazon exclusive, being Amazon exclusive as a self-published author versus traditional is a whole nother topic I won't get into. But for example, if your ebook is Amazon exclusive, you would have, like, mine is 70% royalty rate, and then with your traditional contracts, it's more like 25%. And that difference extends to your paperbacks and your hardbacks too. And then, you know, your agent gets a cut too, of course. But so I did try that path first, and I did a mentorship program with a bunch of authors, like established authors in the community, would pair up with unpublished new authors, and they would go read your book and do editing passes with you and all that. And then it was called Pitch Wars. It's not actually happening anymore. I don't think they do it anymore, but then you would have, it was a very professional looking website, and agents would come and look over what they had. But eventually the process just got too slow. Like, a fast response from a literary agent is like a month. That's considered quick. Sometimes you might not hear back at all. Sometimes it's a lot of form letter responses, that kind of thing. And so eventually I was like, well, I could either, you know, keep beating my head against this wall, or I could just put it up, self-publish it, and see how that goes. And you'll hear a lot, you know, don't quit your day job, which is true, because there are some more upfront costs with self-publishing. Your cover art's going to be a big one. Don't do your own cover unless, you know, you've got some serious art skills. I'm sure you've seen some covers that look like they were homemade, so to speak. Your editing, your even formatting, like going from a Word doc to and properly formatted ebook or paperback book, even ISBNs. I had to look it up today to remember. But say you want 10 ISBNs, which is, you know, the little number barcode on the back of a book that helps you keep track of it in the whole book system. It costs like $300 for 10 ISBNs, which is ridiculous. But and then marketing ad spend, Facebook ads, what's the other one that's big? Amazon ads and Facebook ads are two of the biggest ones. And you can, of course, do a lot of free marketing, like get on Book Talk and hustle, but it only goes so far, of course. And then with that, you're not going to be in a traditional bookstore unless you get big enough that someone wants to pick it up and stuff. So eventually I did that, and it was, at first, it goes nowhere, because really to get traction on websites, you need social proof in the form of reviews. And your mom and dad are going to review, but it's like, how do I get from 5 to 500? And when a stranger looks at this, they might be like, oh, maybe this is worth reading. And that's a slow process, and honestly, one of the best ways to speed that up is to put out more stuff. Like most authors don't get that first. Their first book isn't a huge success, like your Twilight, or I'm sure there are other examples where they just right out the gate get a huge deal, and then Hollywood picks it up, that kind of thing. Most authors, their career is formed like by building a backlist, and sometimes when they do break out, they have like 20 books that they've already written, and it's just building on itself. And then of course the royalties and stuff are building on itself too. And that's, if you can continue to, market them, they keep making money. But really at the end of the day, if that's something you're interested in, really with traditional or self-publishing, it's not glamorous. I think I had one of my quotes, y'all might have heard it, is there's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. It's been attributed to Ernest Hemingway, among others. There's debate over who said it first, but it's like that. It's like a job. It's button seat. You can't wait for inspiration. I personally do like daily word goals of like 750, 1,000 words a day. I don't always hit that, but it's aspirational. But if it is something you're interested in, it's really just persistence is the actual key to it, rather than luck. And that's about it.
Thank you. Thanks to each of you. Those were great presentations. We have time for discussion and questions and answers. If anyone has a question or a comment and would like to start us off.
Ms. Sellers, how many books have you done self-published?
3.
3.
Mm-hmm.
Have you used the same publisher all 3 times?
Yes, I mainly use Amazon's ecosystem, which is Kindle Direct Publishing. So my ebooks are exclusive with them, but then for print distribution, you can get onto sites like barnesandnobles.com, walmart.com. Even if you're not in their brick and mortar stores, you can be on their websites and they can order a print book. And that's through a company called Ingram Spark. But the vast majority of it is through Amazon.
Are you happy with the service that you've gotten from them?
I am, yeah, and there are a lot of arguments for why you would want to be wide or not Amazon exclusive, but at least for me at this stage, I'm not big enough to sacrifice that royalty to be like widely available. Some people do make that choice eventually, but I'm happy with their services, yeah.
Ms. Reed, have you published as yet?
I have not published yet. Another thing I should have said is that, while you're working towards those bigger projects, constantly be sending things out to journals. So I have a poem coming up in a Cottonwood literary magazine, but I don't have any books published or anything yet. I haven't gone through publishing companies, but it's always good to get a poem, a short story in a journal somewhere. You can still add that to your repertoire.
What about online sites, online magazines? There are several that do not involve themselves in the printed word, but they've got a pretty good following on the internet.
Yeah, there are a lot of them that are just solely online. And they're on Submittable too. Submittable's a very good website if you're looking for places to submit to. It's free to make an account, and you can always look and just see, who's looking for fiction right now, who's looking for poetry, and then certain genres or other themes. And a lot of online journals come up on those too. There was one that I cannot remember the name of it right now. It's relatively new, and I believe that's why it's still online. They were looking for submissions not too long ago. And when it comes to online journals too, you get a lot of variety. Oh, I forget the name of this one too, but it's for flash fiction that has to be, I think, only 100 words, and it just stays up on the journal, and you can go. One of my peers actually got published on that one, so his 100-word story is already there. It's nice.
Mr. Hughey, have you published this yet?
So my first publication was in the Sirocco. I had 3 poems published here, and I thought that was amazing when that happened. Since then, I've explored independent publishing as well. I have 2 nonfiction books. My sister, oh my gosh, this is totally a secret, but she's she's in the process of interviewing for medical schools, and she's really going so far. And so a couple years ago, I spent months just really researching the whole process of how you go from undergrad to medical school, and I had so much material that I was like, hey, it's a book. So I put it together, and I independently published it, and it was like The Journey to White Coat is the name of the is the name of the book. And I think I published it through Kindle Direct Publishing as well. It did not have a paperback version. It was just an ebook. And I would get paid. I still get royalties sometimes. It's based on the number of pages people read. So every now and then I'll have like a $10 deposit and go, what's that? And then and it's like, oh my gosh, like my book just bought me a Happy Meal at McDonald's. And so I'm so excited. Like Stephen King said, you're a real writer if you can pay your light bill, and I can't. I can't pay my light bill. But other than that, for many years, I've done so much online content as far as been paid for online content. I've created websites. I've created online articles for content marketing, as far as where you write articles peripheral to a website, such as one was a spiritual kind of woo-woo website, and I wrote about like clairvoyance and clairaudience and like the spiritual senses, and published articles about that. But other than that, I have 2 nonfiction books. They're actually both currently unreleased, as in I pulled them off Amazon because I realized my covers were diabolically awful. Because they had the option, they had the little picture and you put the little words on. I thought, oh, it's a cover. And unfortunately, especially online, people do judge you based on your cover and your content. And so Dr. Kaus had mentioned my passion project, my book of poems and short stories dedicated to the divine feminine. And I've actually invested a significant amount of money into that book, as far as hiring an illustrator that's costing more than I expected, but is painting me a giant painting that'll become the wraparound cover for the book. And she's also very much into the same woo-woo stuff that I'm into, and so it's got poetry and exaltations and incantations and short stories, and I'm just gonna put it all together, independently publish it, and then I'll market it by publishing on, I remember all these woo-woo spiritual Facebook groups. I'll talk about it there. I'll also invest money into Google ads, internet marketing, content marketing, Facebook ads, Twitter ads, if Twitter. LinkedIn and Instagram and then maybe I could brave TikTok, but I have like 7 TikTok videos. They're all my cats. So maybe I could have my cats with the book. So yeah, that's what I've been up to, and I'm teaching. I teach here at GSW. I have an 1101 class, and I have 3 diploma level English classes at the Technical College.
You're teaching here now.
I did. I started this summer. I worked with Dr. Kaus and Dr. Russell on a 1102 class, And this time they trusted me with my own 1101 class with dual enrollment students from Terrell County, who are all superstars. They're incredible students.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's good, sir. That's good.
Hi, Penny Dearman. I'm a new lecturer here, so I don't know any of the former students. But I also went to Georgia College in the state program, so nice to see a fellow Bobcat. I can't help but notice the hustle in the room from all three of you. Can you maybe speak to what your undergraduate in English and then your life experience now, how that's really opened up the opportunities that made it so possible for you to pursue things from so many different angles? Because I think everyone needs to do that now. I do that now. And so can you just speak to that, each of you, if you could?
Who would like to go first? Do we go first?
Sure.
Okay, I'll go first.
Go backwards.
So I tried to go to college 6 times. I'm from a generation where we didn't have ADD or ADHD diagnoses, so I did not know that's what I was dealing with. I just knew I couldn't sit through a class. I couldn't pay attention. Just always struggled. I would start a class off and then I would just disappear because I couldn't handle it. And then finally, I guess time had passed enough that I approached middle aged, and I finally had to ask myself, what do I really want to do? What do I want to do in this life? This is my one life. I want to do it. I want to hustle. I want to do my best at what I really want to do. And I settled on I want to teach and I want to write. And because of the undergrad program at GSW, I'm literally doing both right now. I'm writing my thesis. I'm writing my passion project. I'm teaching 4 classes this term. I literally, I told you I'm woo-woo spiritual. I've said that several times. I prayed for something and then the prayer came true. So it's just like that's all thanks to what I learned going through these classes here at GSW, as far as all the literature, all the writing courses, the research courses, even the foreign language courses, which were the hardest I'd ever taken. But I succeeded thanks to Dr. Godoy's help. But so that's my story, at least. That's my story.
Well, I didn't start off college here at Georgia Southwestern. I actually transferred over and I was a biology major. So I was, picking up worms and little canisters and doing things with flies. It was a fun time for a while. And then I had friends and family who just said, "You're a really good writer." And I said, "I do really love writing." And at the time it was research writing. I actually really do love doing research and like making works cited pages. I guess I'm just a nerd like that.
You're home now.
I'm home. That's why I had this whole paper. But I was doing okay in biology. I was doing fine, but then I just realized I want to do something different. I like writing so much. It's where I'm happy. So I decided to kind of take a leap of faith. I had a lot of great support. Growing up, I just remember kind of backing out of the bookstore each time without a book in my hand. It used to be where every time I would go in there and I'm excited for a book. And after a while, I could just scan the shelves and see that things just kind of seemed the same. And I remember telling my dad, who's sitting in the corner, I'm going to call him out, I said, there's just nothing to read. I just feel like I can look at something and I feel like I've read it 1,000,000 times. And he just said, well, you're just going to have to write it yourself. And then I said, well, I guess I have this responsibility now to write something different. And so I was actually on the professional writing path, so not even the literature path. So I was doing all of the reports and proposals and presentations, and that's why I'm in the grants office, because I was able to have those classes on my resume. I did teaching and tutoring. I remember that class. So, it was interesting to go from Shakespeare to like writing a proposal on why someone needs treadmills in a gym or something like that. And that's just kind of how I got to where I was. I just knew that coming upon graduation, I wanted to take a dive further into creative writing. I had one creative writing class while I was here because that was on my curriculum and I was ready to just get out at that point. But I said, I want to go a little bit deeper, explore my capstone. It was a creative piece, and just kind of get into that world of of writing. I always kept my stories in my head, and where, they're safe, because then you don't have to write them on paper and make things make sense.
You don't have to write that stuff, Jay.
Yeah, I know what things are pronounced like in my head, but other people don't. So that's just part of the journey. But yeah, I'm very thankful for all of my undergraduate classes, even the language classes. I know a lot of Chinese now, so we didn't have French here. I took it at Georgia College, but it's fun to tell people I can count to 10 in Chinese. I can brag on that a little bit.
For me, well, I graduated high school in 2010 and didn't, if you're paying attention, graduate college until 2018. So I took several breaks. And I think ultimately why I finished was working in the writing center, because I had a reason to show up instead of, just staying at home and be like, being absent. That thing where you miss class for a week or two and you're like, well, I can't go back now because how am I going to explain myself? I made that mistake. So I think overall, just the importance of finishing something as big as like your bachelor's was important, and conveys, okay, I can finish another big thing like a book. You do ultimately reach the end. In my case, just having that degree, even if before I was working full time as a writer, I worked as in like a heavy equipment office as a warranty officer. I didn't want anything that was focusing my brain on writing and all, because that was what I was doing after work. So I was looking for something administrative and not focused, but even just having that degree can, help you get a day job while you pursue, more creative passions that you want to turn into a side hustle. And like she said, I only took one creative writing class while I was here, and it was with Blue, and I think that was my last semester. And at that point, I had been writing, and that one of the pieces of advice I hear writers say is write the book you've always wanted to read. And I love that idea. But yeah, just the importance of finishing something and knowing you can.
A big project.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Also just curious, but what are your favorite tropes in books and stories, and why?
So in my thesis novel, I'm taking the trope of the haunted house and the trope of the living house, kind of like Casita and Encanto, and putting those together. So it's like a fully aware and fully, it's a whole character in the book. And it's systematically that trope has become more and more important until actually the entire book now, even though it's set in a contemporary Atlanta, it's almost exclusively in this house that's completely aware of being, it's also it's a magic school, and it's a clinic for supernatural creatures that live in Atlanta, like werewolves and vampires that are hidden, because of course that's the hidden reality of what's going on in Georgia according to it. So I really enjoy that. I also enjoy magic school, like Harry Potter and stuff.
Oh, is that for all of us?
Yes.
Oh, so, I'm sorry. My favorite I don't know. If anyone knows the website TV Tropes, I'm just kind of on there all the time. It's fun to look at. You get to learn things that you wouldn't know. I really like ambiguity, which is something that I'm kind of going through with my thesis right now, is the surreal kind of aspects of, maybe this was real, maybe it wasn't, or, this woman turned into a cow. Why or how? So I kind of like to leave that lingering kind of magic and kind of in the background. And of course I said the Southern Gothic too, so anything that's just a little bit dark.
And surreal.
And surreal. If you read any of, I do have to say it again, Flannery O'Connor. I took her class, so I was inundated in her stories, and they really come to show that there's just some weirdness in the world that you can make into a story in a book, and then you say, I've never met a person who would steal someone's leg, but I feel like I do know that person who would steal someone's leg. And it's a balance right now of how much ambiguity you can put in before people start asking questions. And, whether it's confusing because it's ambiguous or confusing because they just can't understand the story. That's something that I'm struggling with my thesis, and it's a lot of editing and revising. You really have to revise, unfortunately.
Have to kill your darlings. Right?
You do. I like to save my darlings. I just say, I'll use that later then, kind of out of spite, and put it somewhere else.
Just always save the dog. You have to save the dog.
Save the dog. Yeah. So that's what I like, is the mystery of it.
For me, well, since I write romance, it's probably unsurprising that that's most of what I read. And I mean, some of my favorites, Enemies to Lovers, Grumpy Ex-Sunshine, Secret Identities, Forced Proximity, like Only One Bed or Snowed In. But y'all all know what I'm talking about.
It's the season.
Yes. And then with the fantasy, just, if you combine swords and magic and kissing, I'm there. And as
Me
to,
too.
as to why, I don't know really. I just like seeing, two characters kind of put into this situation, and everyone knows how it's going to end, but I like the journey there.
How do you get there?
Yeah. Are you asking?
That's a whole different panel.
Yeah.
Do you have any rituals around your writing or writing process? And if so, what are they?
I certainly do. I'm partially disabled, so I struggle physically sometimes. So I create a nest. Like I put my pillows, and I have a bunch of cats, so I grab my cats and put the cats down, and then I pull the laptop up, and then I kind of recline, and once I complete that, and I have to grab the cat several times and say, no, you stay, and then I can focus. And my goal is usually 1,000 words a day. It takes me. One time it took me 30 minutes. It was amazing, and it's also taken me many, many hours.
I kind of struggle with that ritual part of writing. I need to be more disciplined with it. That's what I tell myself, especially because thesis is coming up in the spring. So be self-disciplined of it. Usually my writing ritual that I see the most come up happens by accident. It'll be when I'm finally going to bed at 2 a.m. in the morning, and then my brain wants to say, this would make a really great story or poem. And so then I'm turning over so I can get my phone and write something down. I say, this will be great. And then I turn back over, and then there's another thought. So I say, okay, I'll just get up and write it. So mine's very much based on just the inspiration of the moment and just not letting it escape once that idea comes to me. And I say, okay, whether I'm writing for an hour or 3 hours, let me just get it all down, and then I can rest and kind of go. But I was going for a while where I was trying to do, I think, an hour 4 days a week. Well, one thing that's good to do is to get an outside group of writers that kind of keep you accountable. So I have an out-of-class workshop that another student in the program started on Fridays, and we meet 4 o'clock every Friday, and we go over someone's story that they've given to the group. So that also keeps me reading, and it also keeps me saying, oh, it's my turn, this week. I'll give it to them first, and then I'll use it for thesis. So mine's very spur of the moment.
For me, I really have to do it in the morning, otherwise I'll get distracted, and then it will be 7 p.m. and I won't feel like writing anymore. So it's, coffee, sit down, and I'm not a disciplined person at all, so I have to just force myself to only do that, otherwise I'll be up and around the house. Once you have to write, suddenly you really want to clean. So sometimes I'll make put a 20-minute timer up on my computer and say, okay, for this 20 minutes, this is all you can do, even if you're just staring at the screen. And once I start, it's the starting that's the hard part, but once I start, then usually the timer goes off and I just keep going. But like you said, having people that are expecting something from you, like beta readers, whether they're other authors or just people who like the kind of stuff you write, having them expect a chapter is nice. And that's part of with self-publishing, you don't have a deadline imposed by your publisher, so you have to set that yourself and try and stick to that yourself, which is difficult. And then things like tools that might help you focus. There's this device called an Alpha Smart, and it used to be, it's like a keyboard with a little screen, and they used it, I think, in the 80s to teach kids typing, but it's not connected to the internet or anything, and you can basically connect it with the cable to your computer to upload anything you write, but just taking that somewhere and writing, and it's free of distractions, unlike a phone or something. That's been a huge productivity boon.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We do have more time, but we can, people can eat, grab some food, and just have one-on-one conversations. Okay. Thank you guys so much.